In this very special episode of Footcandle Films, Chris and I report from the RiverRun International Film Festival in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We talk about some great films that we saw throughout the weekend, and also we lead up to our discussion of the latest Nicolas Cage film directed by David Gordon Green, Joe. All this on the special Footcandle Films episode coming up right now.
What you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Footcandle Films. Film news and reviews from two guys who really like movies.
This episode is brought to you by the Footcandle Film Society. For a schedule of upcoming screenings and membership information, visit the Society's website at www.footcandle.org.
Hello everyone and welcome to this very special episode of Footcandle Films here from the RiverRun International Film Festival in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'm Alan and this is Chris.
Hello guys and ladies.
And we are here from our beautiful hotel rooms here in downtown Winston-Salem, where we have just been spending the day and night at the RiverRun International Film Festival here. Chris, this is our second year as representatives of the Footcandle Society here coming to RiverRun. Absolutely. And we did a little recap episode last year as well, after we saw a couple days worth of films. This is, first weekend of the film festival. I think last year for RiverRun, we made it out to the closing weekend.
I think that's right.
You're right. So, unfortunately with work and family and everything else, we can't quite take off the whole necessary 2 weeks to go see the entire film festival. But we at least try to squeeze in one weekend here to do a little recap. Now, for those of you who are used to listening to the show and we talk about some films that are in movie theaters and we give some reviews and other things, many of the films we're going to talk about are probably ones you're not going to find coming to a movie theater anytime soon. These are going to be a lot more independent, a little more regional based, or maybe making a lot more film festival circuit films. But hopefully there'll be opportunities to either find them online at some point or through some other means. So we're going to talk about some of the films that we have seen in the festival so far during our short stay here. Chris, does that sound like a plan to you there? So
sounds excellent.
Chris, you and I both separated and kind of went out to go see some different films just to kind of broaden our exposure on many of these. So why don't we just kind of alternate? Let's talk about the films we saw and some things that maybe our audience would find interesting about the films that we did see. You want to start us off with the first one you saw?
Sure. So I went to my opening night presentation was called a movie called The Chef, and it was a comedy that comes from France, and it stars Jean Reno, and he's the main chef of the title, and it was
chef of the chef.
The chef of the chef.
That would be him.
And it was a good film. It was a very light comedy. It's a kind of they would refer to as a farce, and it was fun. Kind of predictable, but yet still had a lot of funny moments. And the thing, it centers around food, and they did spend a lot of time showing them like prepping meals, and it did make me hungry.
Okay, well that's a sign of a good food movie if you come out feeling a little hungry from it. So
yeah, so it's a good comedy. It'll probably, I assume, maybe play in some places in the United States, but definitely when it comes out on DVD, if you like, a lighthearted comedy and, something you don't typically see or comedies focusing on food, check it out. It's definitely worthwhile.
Okay. Well, the first film I got to see for the festival here was a documentary, and the title tells you a little bit about where it's going. The title is To Be Tye, and that's, to be George Takei, basically. It's a documentary of George Takei, that is Star Trek Sulu, among many, many other television and movie roles over the years. George Takei, some people may be familiar with a little bit of his backstory. I honestly wasn't as much. Having to go through an internment camp after World War II with his family, a Japanese family, obviously. A lot of the grief and the drama from that still sticking with him today. It's very obvious throughout the documentary and drives a lot of what he does. But also this documentary was very light in many places too. It did explore the relationship he has with his now husband, some of the issues they took on with gay rights and equal rights many, many times over the years, the representation of Japanese people in the media and in pop culture. And then, of course, we got to hear a lot about stories of his time on Star Trek and other places. I'll say this is a fun documentary. I think whether you are a fan of his work or his the causes he fights for in his career, regardless of your stance on any of that or his talent as an actor, this is a fun documentary to see somebody who a very, very interesting life that they've led for many years in and out of Hollywood. I will say one really funny thing that you'll probably appreciate, Chris, is they did have some of his co-stars on Star Trek interviewed for the documentary.
The
Shatner was interviewed.
Awesome.
But it was actually more of a running joke that Shatner tried to very much downplay that he even really knew George Takei very well. And where it's very clear to everybody else in the cast that that's just William Shatner for you.
Wow.
Supposedly there was a lot of kerfuffle that George Takei invited the whole cast to his wedding, and Shatner did not show up, claiming he never was invited, and it became a big little spat between the two. Anyway, there's a lot of humor in the documentary. George and his husband are honestly a really, really fun couple to watch. And the documentary is just a good, light documentary with enough heavy tones in there talking about the internment camp experience that really, really clouds a lot of his life experience now. So, Tye Takei, the directors there, producers, Jennifer Crute and Bill Weber. Great job done by those guys on that film.
Well, it sounds like I'm interested to see it because it sounds, I mean, it's a biography. The guy's still living so he can be interviewed. And it sounds like it's a fun watch because he's kind of light, he can be funny. It's lighthearted, but yet it deals with the issues of, obviously gay rights and then the internment camp. But yet it doesn't sound like, from what you said, that it's heavy-handed. It doesn't beat you over the head trying to teach you a lesson. So it sounds like you learn something, yet you don't get beaten over the head with it, which is nice.
Absolutely. It's more of a matter of you get to see what's driven him all these years because he's a very prolific person. I mean, between everything he does. I didn't realize he was involved in as many commercials and TV shows and guest appearances places and convention speeches and everything else. I mean, he's extremely busy for being, I think, in his 70s.
Wow.
So it was a good story, good documentary there. All right, what's the next thing you saw, Chris?
So the next film I saw was from director Sam Fleischner, and I think it was his second film. And it's called Stand Clear of the Closing Doors. Mm-hmm. And what it's about is there's an autistic teenager named Ricky living in New York. And he decides, or he kind of has, not a attack or something, but he is off his medication and he ends up getting lost and spends, days kind of wandering around the subway system, and his family, of course, panics and tries to find him. And it was kind of an investigation of what it's like for that to be happening to a family. And what was specifically interesting for me as a filmgoer is a lot of times when you see this subject matter, it's usually just, I guess, by nature, a lot of times it's like, your middle America white family. And what was interesting about this was they were a Hispanic family living in New York City. They had immigration maybe issues they weren't directly handled with, but you kind of saw how, autism can affect everyone, obviously. And it was interesting from that perspective for me because it was kind of like, oh yeah, that this can happen to anyone. It's happened to this family and the struggles that they were dealing with. And it was shot in a very realistic manner. As far as I knew, they were first-time actors in there, so it just had a very real look to it. Something that I wanted a little more substance to the movie as far as dialogue or story, but it was very kind of open-ended. And they had a lot of sound collages. Like, obviously he spends a lot of time on the subway.
Sure.
So there's a lot of, the screeching of the metal and then scenes of passing trains. It was very experimental, I guess, in many ways, which I could see could take a lot of viewers out of it. And its running time's about, over an hour and a half. So it was challenging in that respect, but it was interesting. And I'd be willing to give the director another shot to see, what he's going to do next. Because he definitely seems to have a style that he's going for.
So it kind of gave you a sense that is a very competent director that's probably got some other great, interesting ideas that could be coming. This one may have been just a little bit of a challenge to really get into. Yeah, I felt sometimes that it would have been better served as maybe a short film as opposed to making it into a feature length. But that Stand Clear of the Closing Doors. So. Okay, great. Well, let me tell you one that I saw as well, and this was a documentary. I got to see two documentaries in a row, so it's kind of a good way to get things started out for me here.
Yeah.
The film Gringo Trails. Okay. And this was a documentary by Peggy Vale, and really interesting subject matter. What she explored is this idea that we've seen a culture grow over the last 20 years of backpackers and people, younger kids traveling, and people who want to go and explore different places in the world and just see things that are maybe a little off the beaten path. The challenge is that when everybody finds out about a place that's a little off the beaten path, it's no longer really...
It's not off the beaten path.
It's not a beaten path. It's a paved road now all of a sudden going to it. So the idea is that it's this whole phenomenon about when people start to find out about a very interesting place to go visit in a community that has that touristy spot is not ready for all the tourism attraction that they're going to have. They're not able to handle it. How things can really damage the country, the area that tourist attraction's in, some of the nature and habitat around it as well. The film really starts out with an example of a young man who basically was trekking through the Amazon jungle and got lost back in the early 80s. It was actually out there for a month before rescued. He wrote a book about his experience. Well, his book triggered a lot of people saying, ooh, I want to go to the Amazon and explore and have an adventure kind of like this guy did. Okay. Hopefully not to get lost for a month and have to be rescued, but
right.
But then the problem is that the Amazon jungle, this area of the jungle where this man wrote the book, became so popular where all these backpackers, all these kids traveling, all ended up there. And it's one of those things where the community wasn't really ready to handle that. Another example is brought up about a very, very gorgeous island beach, I think, out in Southeast Asia, that a young man finds and just really appreciates it, makes a mistake of telling a couple people back in the mainland, they tell all their friends, and all of a sudden, within 10 years, that beach is now basically like Myrtle Beach,
oh, wow.
New Year's Eve, Mardi Gras. I mean, it's like a huge party destination. So again, it's just, the whole documentary is really trying to help us understand that these communities, these areas, these towns or places where these tourist areas are, they're not always prepared as what to do to basically control tourism and make sure that the tourists don't destroy what it is that's so great about the area we're in. So it's a very specific subject matter, but the documentary does a really great job of helping you understand this is an issue, but also it's very hopeful in that the last example we hear is a community back in the Amazon that has really taken the challenge of saying, you know what, we're going to control how tourists come here, how we help them experience what it is we have to share with them, but making sure that it doesn't get out of control and we don't lose control of what we have. So it's I thought it was a really fascinating subject matter, and really appreciated the documentary for what it was. So that's Gringo Trails. Beautiful footage all over the place. Bhutan, Thailand, Bolivia, other places that they traveled to get the footage from some of these locations. So a great travel documentary as well as a good subject matter about the challenges these communities face.
Well, not to be left out, since you've seen some documentaries, I got to see a documentary as well.
Let's keep the documentary train rolling then.
Right.
Sure.
This one's called A Fragile Trust, Plagiarism, Power, and Jason Blair at the New York Times. Are you familiar with Jason Blair at all?
I'm not. I know Shattered Glass, and I know what was the guy's name? His name was Glass, but what was his first name?
I cannot remember. But yes, you're right.
Yeah, but the idea that a journalist with plagiarism faced with that accusations. So is this a similar situation here?
Yes, absolutely. And I was not familiar. I'd seen Shattered Glass, which was about the guy who had problems with the New Republic, was the magazine that he was writing for. Right. So yeah, Jason Blair was a writer at the New York Times. And he started as an intern there, and basically what he ended up doing was plagiarizing, and not just once, but he ended up being what they called a serial plagiarist. And when the scandal broke, it rocked the world of journalism and caused the New York Times embarrassment, but also a lot of problems, because then they ended up having to go back and uncover, the story that got him in trouble was a story about an Iraq War soldier who had gotten, so he plagiarized that story, and they found out about it, and then they began to unravel, well, how much of your stuff was plagiarized.
Sure, right.
And it was a shocking amount. What's interesting about the film, in addition to revealing that and educating me as a viewer, was also they were able to get him to be on screen, and he was interviewed at length. And it comes into question exactly his mental state when this was going on. He admits that he was an alcoholic and also was using cocaine.
Wow.
So there's that. And then he has some mental problems. And they talk about that in the film. And at the end of the film, it's very interesting how they kind of say this is where he is now, and this is where journalism today is. And it also addresses race, because he is an African American, and how that was handled in the times, as far as did he get to the position that he was, and was he fact checked as much as maybe he should have been? Because, and when he started messing up, was it caught as early as maybe it should have been? Because did race play an issue? And it's very, and you end up saying you don't know. All you know is that what happened, and it was very delicately handled. And I thought that it was very interesting how they hinted at things. And he now is a life coach, believe it or not, and that's what he does for a living. And it's just, I don't know, it's a very fascinating story, and I can't believe I didn't really know much about it. The other thing that they brought up was that a challenge was made to the New York Times around this time, in all papers. They were seeing the writing on the wall about the internet, and how the internet was taking over, and people would stop subscribing to the paper, and it was a big push at the New York Times at that time to get content out and to get content up on the web. So was that driving the need to not maybe fact check? So it kind of, it just brought up a lot of different issues about news and about how we take news and about what the end goal is. I mean, they are a business, so they're trying to provide a product, but it just was a fascinating documentary, and I think PBS has gotten the rights to it, and I think they will be airing it. So this is one that you can probably see if you kind of look out for it. So.
Wow. Okay, that does sound really interesting. So some of the great things about some of the documentaries you can see at a film festival like this, learning some of these subjects and topics that you just didn't know anything about. I mean, that's part of the joy of kind of coming in and hearing these real life stories. The next film I'm going to talk about, the last film before we get to kind of our main film discussion here in a moment for me, was a film called Walesa, Man of Hope. And it is, it's a dramatic interpretation, but it's based off a true story of, we have, in Poland, we have Lech Walesa, who, see if I can best describe this as simply as I can.
All I know is he's the guy who, to me, looked like Robin Williams for the longest time.
Yes, he does.
And
that's
like whenever I saw him growing up in the news, I was like, hey, that's Robin Williams with a mustache. But for some reason, that's how I know the Walesa name, is because I always thought, okay, that has nothing to do with the film. But I just thought I'd throw that out.
No, but it is, it's uncanny, the gentleman they had playing was Walesa, because you actually see some real footage at the very end of the real Walesa, and it's like, for a moment, I couldn't tell the difference.
Wow.
And it's like until...
But did he also look like Robin Williams?
They both really did look like Robin Williams, now that you mention it.
Okay.
But on all seriousness, this is he is a Nobel Prize winner in Poland. He was an electrician working in the shipyard, got really wrapped up in what was happening when Poland was taken over by the Soviet Union and communism was kind of pushed through. He helped rise up a lot of the strikes that went on, starting out the shipyard area, and then it kind of spread to other industries across the country. And he became the face and the head of that strike movement. They call it the Solidarity Movement. And that was what he really became famous for, and became a very powerful leader in that area. He did win the Nobel Prize for his work in trying to get equality for all the workers and to get the rights to try to help improve the overall government representation they had. This film was done by a Polish director, Andrzej Wajda, which I had no knowledge of anything he's done. Supposedly, though, he is one of Poland's best known and most revered filmmakers. So it's been around actually almost 90 years. He's a very old film director. He was born in 1926.
Wow.
And he's still making really, really good films. This was a really well-made film. Very, very nicely shot. I was really impressed with the way that they made some of the footage look like archival footage, even though it wasn't. And then that way, when they actually did use archival footage, it was perfectly blended. I mean, I could not have, I honestly told you sometimes what stuff was archival and what stuff was recreated. They really did match it up well. And again, having the actor look so incredibly like and seem to have the same mannerisms as the real Willessa. I thought it's a story I was not at all familiar with. It was obviously very, very detailed in the politics and the political structure and everything, which is a little hard to follow if you're not familiar with it going in. And it being subtitled made that a little challenging as well. But really well-made film, very, very strong story. Something, again, I'm very interested in learning a little bit more about now that I've seen this film. So that's Willessa, Man of Hope. I really don't know where there's going to be an opportunity to see it. Hopefully online at some point soon, because it is a very, very well-made film.
Cool.
What's the last one you've got before we talk about our big one?
Actually, that's...
Oh, that's right. You got it. We need to talk about our last big film together. So Chris and I have kind of spread out, 3 or 4 films that we saw each on our own, but then we ended up tonight with kind of the big feature presentation for opening weekend here, the one I know you and I were both interested in looking forward to seeing, and that is the latest film from David Gordon Green, Joe, starring Nicolas Cage and Tye Sheridan.
Hey, mister.
Yeah?
Me and my daddy just got into town. I was wondering if you'd give us a job.
I pay a day's pay for a day's work. And if we work till dinner and get rained out, I pay for the whole day. Does that sound fair enough?
Yes, sir.
I'm Joe. And I watch that boy. I see someone who's nothing like me.
The hell you looking at?
Why do you stick around like this?
What's most important right now is me taking care of Dorothy and Mama. Kind of got a family problem right now.
It's kind of interesting in that David Gordon Green, graduate of North Carolina School of the Arts here in Winston-Salem, and his film Prince Avalanche we actually saw last year.
And reviewed
here at the RiverRun. So we kind of figure we make it 2 for 2 and go see his newest film, Joe, which was also showing at the film festival here. So, Chris, you want to sum up a little bit about what Joe is about?
Sure. So the title character, Joe, is played by Nicolas Cage, and he is basically, he's an ex-convict, and he drinks like a fish, he gambles, and he's had lots of run-ins with the police.
Lots of run-ins with some ladies.
Lots of run-ins with ladies as well. And he sees a young teen, which this is played by Tye Sheridan, and kind of takes him on and lets him have a job. And he tries to become kind of like a father figure. And you see the struggles with this that, Joe himself kind of has demons, has anger issues.
Yeah, you could say that.
And the boy, whose name is Gary in the film, he's has problems with his family, and his father specifically is very abusive. And so the film shows kind of the story of how these two know each other, and they learn a little bit about each other's lives. And it's a tough film to watch for sure. Yeah. It's very, very dark.
Yeah, I will say if where we had Prince Avalanche last year, which was light. It wasn't a flat-out comedy because it did have enough drama in it last year, but it was more comedic and more light than it was heavy.
Sure.
This is the opposite. This was a very dark film, a very heavy film. Had moments of fun and lightness to it, but very, very few and very far between. Most of it was a very dark undertone throughout the film. Overall, I'll say I liked the film okay. Mm-hmm. Didn't really like it. It was a tough one to kind of get my head around. I will say, though, the performances in it were outstanding. I think the character development was outstanding. I will say the character of Joe that Nicolas Cage plays, not only did Nicolas Cage do an outstanding job in this performance, but the character of Joe, I think, is a very interesting character. Fascinating the way they wrote him and what they shared with him and what they didn't share with us about him.
Right.
Made for an interesting character. Where I liked the movie Mud from last year, which had a little similarities to it.
Sure.
Where I liked the movie Mud much better as a film, I actually liked the character of Joe probably a little even better than Matthew McConaughey's character of Mud from the movie Mud. So it's a little parallels there with that. But I will say the character development for me was the biggest thing. I really liked what they did with all the characters in the film. Even the really random ones we see for just a scene or two are all very, very well thought out.
Well, and somebody, I think, you'll agree we need to mention in the discussion, we've mentioned Nicolas Cage, we've mentioned Tye Sheridan, but a third player in this film, who I think is a pretty major role, is the father of Gary, and his name is Gary Poulter, and he was a first-time actor pretty much.
That's right.
And he played the dad, and he was amazing.
He was close to 60 years old or so, I believe. Supposedly, and the reason we know a little bit more information on that, we did get to attend a special Q&A with director David Gordon Green and the star Tye Sheridan and the screenwriter. And they shared us a little bit of information about Gary Poulter. And it sounds like he was a circus performer or involved in the circus for a while. They met him at a bus stop.
Yes.
And just because of the look and character that he seemed to have, they talked to him about being in the movie. That's fascinating because he was absolutely really, really great in this role. Scary, terrifying, just very real. It was a great performance.
Yeah, and I agree. And it's something that seeing him, the presence he had reminded me of Bruce Dern. You know, who's kind of an unknown Bruce Dern, but how you can imagine, those of you familiar with Bruce Dern, you see him and you think of him in a certain type of role. And that's what this guy was bringing to the screen, that type of presence, but yet he was a complete unknown. Yeah. So that speaks to, I thought, what a good job.
And unfortunately, passed away shortly after production was done. So really, he's only got this one film credit to his name, which is a shame, seeing how strong he was in this role. But so really sad situation there. But I will say with Joe, I thought had a lot technically going for it. Some great performances, some great character development. It was a tough movie to watch. Definitely a one-timer for me. And the storyline still, it was a little harder for me to grab a hold of it. But I do admire the film for its performances. What did you feel about the film?
I liked the film, and I had trouble sitting through it because of the subject matter. It's just very, there's a lot of abuse and a lot of violence, and it was tough to watch because it was all very gritty and very realistic. But I did appreciate kind of at the end of the film the notes that it ends on, and I don't want to spoil anything, but it's just, I thought what was interesting is while Joe is a flawed hero, he's not perfect. He's obviously the title character. He takes this boy under his wing, but he is still making mistakes in the movie. Mm-hmm. He makes mistakes that make you see him not as an ideal person or an ideal hero, but yet you still like him and you still want to pull for him. So that depicting a flawed hero in this way, I thought it made me like the film. And it is a tough film, I guess, to say you like, because it is kind of a grueling watch. But
yeah. And basically the whole movie, screenplays by Gary Hawkins, who was actually at the Q&A afterwards as well, based on a novel by the late Larry Brown. So a lot of great influences in here on the story. And then, of course, you've got David Gordon Green, who has ranged everything from very, very small independent films early in his career, slowly ramped up to big budget movies. Pineapple Express was probably his biggest budget movie and probably the one that made the most money for him in general. Then went on to make some very, very kind of lowbrow comedies with The Sitter and Your Highness. Mm-hmm. Now with Prince Avalanche, and it's definitely with Joe, he has kind of come back around to those smaller films that are a little deeper, a little more dramatic to them. So interesting to see the cycle. And sticking around for the Q&A afterwards with David Gordon Green, Tye Sheridan, a young performer. I think he's maybe 16 years old now.
Either 16 or 17. Yeah.
Still a young performer, but Tye Sheridan, who was in The Tree of Life, he was in Mud that we've mentioned, and of course now with Joe. All three performances outstanding. I mean, this is a very, very talented young actor, so it was nice to be able to hear him talk after the film. And then with the screenwriter as well, we got to hear a lot more about the production of the film, some of the notes behind it. It was a good night, good discussion, absolutely, with that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm curious too, Tye Sheridan, and talking about his upcoming, he's played in the 3 movies that he's had out that you just mentioned. It's been very serious, and he seemed to be a very, down to earth, young kind of guy, and he would laugh about things. And before I could ask the question or something, it was kind of like, I just want him to be able to have a role where he could have fun, because it seemed like everything had been some things kind of dark. And sure enough, he mentioned that one of the films that he's working on is a comedy / like thriller, but basically it's scouts versus zombies.
Yeah, so like Boy Scouts versus zombies.
So I was
awesome.
like, well, that's good for him that he's gonna get to have a little fun.
Well, he also said he's going to be he has a cameo in a sitcom, or did a small bit part in a sitcom. So I agree with you. It'd be nice to see him have some fun, because unfortunately we're used to seeing him in a very dramatic southern role there. So yeah, the movie Joe, we do think it's worth checking out. Sounds like both of us are in favor of it. Just Chris is maybe a little more positive about it than I was, but be warned, it is a very dark movie. It's a very intense movie, but good performances, very, very fascinating characters, I will say.
I was surprised. A note that I'll kind of end on was when we discussed Prince of the Avalanche last year, we commented on how it was very much a David Gordon Green film, and the depictions of nature and some of the cinematography and the style that he kind of goes after, or the cinematographer he uses to get his style. Interestingly enough, in this film, I feel that it's there, but I felt like it was actually kind of muted, and that's what made the film darker. Mm-hmm. A lot of times the kind of lyricism with nature kind of lightens the film, or it makes it more beautiful. And this was so heavy and so dark that I feel like it could have used some more of his poetic lyricism with cinematography and stuff. But instead, I guess they focused more on hard story, which is what the movie was about. But how do you feel as far as, does this represent a David Gordon Green?
Well, I think it did. And I'll tell you, actually, I'll kind of go down one little path here.
Okay.
This may not mean anything to anybody else listening, because if they haven't seen this film or Prince Avalanche, but it does make me bring up a big question of themes between his movies.
Okay.
To me, trees and the destruction of trees versus the planting of trees. Prince Avalanche, basically the entire landscape is ravaged land by fire, where all the trees are gone in a lot of the spots and the places.
Now, why didn't you ask this to David Gordon?
I know. I was really thinking about it. I had it at the tip of my tongue.
Sure.
So you've got a film where they are basically having to rebuild a community that has been ravaged by forest fires. So basically destruction of trees. Mm-hmm. Here in the movie Joe, the profession of Mr. Joe and soon to be Gary, his young helper here, is basically poisoning trees that are being commissioned to tear down. Supposedly they're having to be a little bit under the table, where they're being told to go in and poison trees, so then the trees will start to die, and then they can go ahead and get clearance to remove them, whoever their employer was. So they're basically going and poisoning the trees as they go along. So again, that whole destruction of trees, what does that mean? What's the bigger picture there? And then there is a scene towards the end that has to do with kind of replanting new trees for a new phase in someone's life. Mm-hmm. A lot of themes there with nature, and I think especially with trees in the last couple of films I'm very curious about. So I think there was enough of a David Gordon Green feel to this film.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially some of the scenes in the bars and other places where it's just lingering, getting to see the characters in the room and kind of seeing a very diverse, odd, eclectic mix of characters. Yeah, I think it fit in just fine. Even though this one definitely got very much on the dark side, it was. I think it was still very much a David Gordon Green film.
And he mentioned too in the Q&A how somebody asked him basically how he goes about using a lot of non-actors, and David said in the Q&A that he basically is always casting. He's always looking for people that he thinks would fit, because that's just kind of how his mind works. And the workers that he gets to be on that crew were amazing.
Oh, yeah. He's got, it's an incredible range of performances to see in this film.
Sure.
So I do think it's worth seeing, although we caution, very dark, very heavy, violent, disturbing at times, so just a lot to watch out for with that. So Chris, that has been our RiverRun experience for the last 36 hours here. So we covered quite a number of films in the time we had allotted to come out here for the weekend. The Films Festival is still going on for a couple weeks, so by the time, if you're listening to this episode pretty quickly after we release it, there still may be some days left of the festival. You can go check out some of the films out there.
Right. We're on the second day of the festival, and I think it runs for 10 days. So, hopefully, there'll be some time to still check out some films.
Absolutely. And we just want to say a special thanks to RiverRun for putting together this film festival and doing what they do. Such an amazing, diverse range of films to choose from. Everything from documentaries to foreign films to more domestic and regional films, shorts and animated. everything in between. So it's a great festival. We've enjoyed it 2 years in a row here. We look forward to making that a tradition going forward as well. As we kind of just recap for you some films that maybe you can kind of keep on your radar and hope you have a chance to check out in the near future there. Any other closing thoughts there, Chris? Anything?
No, not that I can think of. I would just encourage the ones we've mentioned, try to seek them out. So they're definitely worthwhile.
All right. Well, we will return back to our normal format here in the next episode with our standard reviews and just news and recommendations. But right now we just wanted to spotlight RiverRun, and thanks for putting together a great film festival, and thanks to all the filmmakers and producers that did submit their films. We really enjoyed checking them out here on this first weekend. If you have any more information that you need to get about the film festival, I'm sure you can look it up online, search for RiverRun, and you'll find plenty about it. Now, you've been listening to Footcandle Films here on The Mesh, our special episode. If you want to learn more about what we do at The Mesh, you can go to themesh.tv and check out all the other shows we broadcast on our podcast network. If you want to learn a little bit more about what we do as a film society with Footcandle, you can check us out at footcandle.org and find out what we're up to in our film society. So with that, we'll tune out for now, but stay tuned as we bring in our normal, regularly scheduled Footcandle show here in the coming weeks. So thanks a lot for listening.
See you in the ticket room.
Watch news through the courtesy of Footcandle Film Society.
Special thanks to Carpal Tuller for the show theme music. For more about Carpal Tuller, visit www.carpaltuller.com. You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.